There are many untold or forgotten stories of World War II. One of the forgotten tales tells of Soviet raiders of the dark who terrorized Nazi regiments. The undetected, stealth-perfected foes invoked dread into the souls of every German soldier. Spotlights would light up the sky in search of the bare-boned, plywood biplanes that silently came from the depths of hell. The soft whooshing sound of their enemies would petrify any German soldier in the dead of night. It was a sound that reminded them of a witch flying by on her broom. Except it was no witch. It was the 588th. Throughout World War II, the Soviet Union utilized their female counterparts in not just the war effort at home, but on the front lines as well. Women fought alongside male ground forces in a variety of ways. While many Soviet women were a part of the medical personnel, over 2,000 of the women were deployed into infantry roles. Between 1941 and 1945, 2,484 female snipers were functioning in this role, of whom only 500 survived the war. In the beginning, the Soviet Union didn't allow women to fight in the war at all. On June 22, 1941, the Germans attacked the Soviet ground forces, causing devastation. Thousands of women were turned away until the unmeasurable losses of Operation Barbarossa. Attitudes had to be changed, and quickly, in order to ensure the safety and sanctity of the motherland remained intact. Greater roles for women who wanted to fight in the war had to be carved. The only ones that were made available to women were within the ground forces. Being in the ground forces was a fearful job, and the chance to survive was almost zero. So how did these women manage to become one of the most feared raiders? But first, let's talk about the founding. By the 1930s, flying was especially popular among women, but when Germany invaded Russia, the women were denied entry into the Air Force. Major Marina Raskova was one of the first women to enter the Soviet Air Force after thousands of letters written in outrage were sent to her protesting the prohibition. Major Raskova was the Soviet equivalent of Amelia Earhart and was a personal confidant of Stalin himself. Joseph admired Raskova greatly, and so when she approached Stalin with letters of protest and a proposition to create 3 regiments, he hardly argued. Women rushed to enlist, and many were integrated into regiments to fight alongside male pilots as their co-pilots, but approximately 1,200 women were placed in one of 3 all-female regiments: the 586th Fighter Aviation Regiment, the 587th Bomber Aviation Regiment, and the 588th Night Bomber Aviation Regiment. Among the thousands that enlisted, only 400 were accepted for each regiment. The pilots spent a year in intensive training, learning not only how to fly, but to navigate and maintain their aircraft as well. Their schooling normally took years to complete, but in the face of war and discrimination, the women were forced to buckle down. Pilots who were deemed the most qualified were assigned to the 586th Fighter Aviation Regiment, the second most qualified to the 587th, and the least qualified to the 588th. In a unique and surprising turn of fate, the so-called least qualified pilots became the most feared and famous regiment. They were the unlikely heroes in the skies. That's just the beginning of it, though. The least qualified pilots were given old, expired, horrible equipment to execute sorties with. Wartime efforts aren't known for having high standards, but even this was a bit questionable. The 588th Night Bomber Aviation Regiment were equipped with old men's uniforms and outdated Polikarpov PO-2 biplanes. The old PO-2 aircraft had primarily been used as crop dusters until the breakout of war. The least qualified regiment was the last on the totem pole to receive equipment and never received modern commodities such as communication radios. Despite the lack of confidence and funding the 588th received, we can only imagine that the women made the best of it. When their boots didn't fit, they shredded their bedding to keep the boots on their feet. When their clothes were too large and baggy, they hemmed and sewed their pants to fit better. The women were treated just like their male counterparts, apart from being given more soap, of course. Many of the girls cut their hair to appear more masculine, but each aircraft was detailed with pieces of floral art. The pioneering all-female 588th Regiment became a crucial Soviet asset in winning World War II. Do you know what the nickname of the PO-2 biplanes was? They were called a coffin with wings because of how old and rickety they were. The planes were composed of plywood with canvas stretched over it. If a tracer bullet was to strike the plane, it could light up the aircraft in an instant. The aircraft's top speed was 93 miles per hour and could only carry 2 bombs under each wing at a time. Due to the weight of the crew and bombs, the PO-2s were forced to fly low enough to be spotted easily by opposing forces. To ensure the utmost safety as possible, the 588th were forced to fly at night. The pilot sat up front while the navigator, who also acted as the bombardier, sat in the rear. But that's not all. The women didn't even carry parachutes in the event of catastrophe. They weighed too much, and the women were already flying so close to the ground. The PO-2s could only carry 2 bombs at a time. Dozens of bombing sorties were taken on, ranging from 8 to 18 in a single night. The Night Witches would fly out to drop their 2 bombs, return to refuel and take on 2 more bombs, and fly out once more. Sometimes the aircraft would return to base riddled with bullet holes, but that rarely stopped a Night Witch. Nadezhda Popova, one of the most famous Night Witches, had once returned from a sortie with 42 bullet holes in her plane, helmet, and map. In an interview with historian Albert Axel, Popova remembered that night like it had been yesterday. After counting the 42 bullet holes in their aircraft, Popova turned to her navigator and said, "Katya, my dear, we will live long." As we now know, planes weren't well equipped with modern technology, which forced the women to rely on old methods like maps, compasses, stopwatches, pencils, and flashlights to find their objectives and get back. And because the cockpits were open to the elements, the pilot and navigator were exposed to rain, freezing winds, and sometimes even snow. In extremely cold weather, they were at additional risk for frostbite. If that didn't impress you yet, then you need to hear the most formidable aspect of how they executed their missions with such horrible equipment. The PO-2s flew low and slow in the skies under the cover of darkness. Each sortie was dangerous. The Germans expected their attacks and would create concentric circles of searchlights and flak guns around the areas they thought likely to be targets. Crews of 3 aircraft would fly into the encampments. 2 planes would divert the attention of ground crews while the 3rd plane awaited the navigator's cue. When the pilot felt the tap on their sister, she would cut the engine and idle through the sky quietly. The only sound that could be heard was the faint whooshing sound of the wind through the struts. This sound alone generated more fear of the night in the Germans than any gunfire could. When the aircraft reached their target, the navigator would release the bombs and the pilot would, hopefully, restart the engine and fly away before being seen. The 3 planes would switch their positions until all 6 bombs had been dropped. The suddenness and quietness of their explosive violence terrified Nazi soldiers. Those having experienced terror in the night nicknamed these aircraft the Nachthexten, or the Night Witches. The term was meant to be derogatory, but the 588th, the Night Witches, took on the name with pride. Beneath the starlight of the heavens, the Night Witches rode with their wings of glory until the very end. The German ranks had become so afraid of the Night Witches that any soldier who managed to shoot down one of their aircraft was immediately rewarded with a Silver Cross, something that was only given for exceptional merits in military warfare. Under the conditions the Night Witches acted on, we can clearly picture now that there were many conspiracies surrounding the 588th Regiment. The Germans believed the Night Witches to be one of 2 things: mastermind criminals who were sent to serve their sentences on the front lines, or they were women who were given special injections to give them flawless eyesight to see in the night. Whether it was true spellcasting or undeniable luck, the wind would whisper before the Night Witches came and cast their spells on their foes below. From June 1942 to October 1945, the Night Witches flew an estimated 23,672 combat sorties and collectively logged 28,676 flight hours. The Witches dropped over 3,000 tons of bombs and 26,000 incendiary shells. They either damaged or destroyed 17 river crossings, 9 railways, 2 railway stations, 26 warehouses, 12 fuel depots, 176 armed cars, 86 prepared firing positions, and 11 searchlights. In addition to this, they also made 155 supply drops to the Soviet ground forces. 32 Night Witches died in the line of service, including Colonel Raskova, the founding mother. 89 Soviet women won the highest honor offered to them by their country, the Hero of the Soviet Union Award. The courage and determination of the Night Witches was something to aspire to. In the face of sexual harassment and discrimination, the witches worked harder with each passing night. In the face of death, betrothed to the darkness, the Night Witches prevailed in spirit and in fear.